Britain?
I wouldn't quite go that far, but it may turn into it, who knows. Well, Britain is a formally, technically Christian country, in that the coronation of the present Queen was a Christian ceremony, and the Christian religion is still quite prominent in the control and direction of schools. It's still spoken of with respect. The British Broadcasting Corporation still broadcasts quite a lot of Christian material, often at rather odd hours of the day. But in general, no, it's not a Christian country at all, and if you're thinking of what's in the hearts of the people.
Let's talk about this report. It was a 2-year commission chaired by a former senior judge, Baroness Butler Sloss. Now, what does it say to you that a baroness, a former judge, the establishment, as it were, is telling you that Britain is no longer a Christian country?
Well, it tells me that. The Baroness Butler Sloss, as far as I know, is a very nice church-going Anglican in person, but it tells me that people of this kind are no longer prepared vigorously to defend the Christian nature of the country. Now, this thing was described as a report, but if you read it, it's actually really almost a polemic, certainly a pamphlet calling for change. But the interesting thing is that it says people of that kind are now interested in pursuing the idea that the country should be de-Christianized.
I mean, am I right in recalling that the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, was indeed one of those behind this report as well?
Oh yes, there is a long, active retreat by people who are part of established religion in this country. They no longer feel confident enough to say, actually, yes, of course Britain is less Christian than it was 100 years ago, but actually this is a bad thing, we need to re-evangelize the country. That is a cry you almost never hear. You hear instead, well, we need to compromise with the new arrangements, we need to accept that Christianity doesn't have as much authority as it used to, therefore it should be less represented in the schools, less represented in the laws, less represented in public life. It's a recipe for defeat.
Let's deal with a couple of specific points that the Commission on Religion and Belief in Public Life, which produced this document, says. It describes faith schools as socially divisive and suggests that the selection of children for those schools on the basis of their belief ought to be phased out.
Well, of course it's divisive. It's bound to be divisive. If you have a society in which the Christian religion is increasingly a minority choice, then those parents who want their children to have a specifically Christian education in the state system are going to have to seek some sort of means of getting it, which will involve a discrimination between those parents who want it and those who don't. These schools, which are in the state system, because actually mass education in Britain was largely begun by the church and the state then took it over, these schools are generally a good deal better than the ordinary state schools which have no religious affiliation. And in any area, people generally compete quite hard to get into them. And there is a strong suggestion that quite a lot of parents will pretend to a religious faith, attend church for many years to try and get their children into them. Well, you can see why people might resent that. But on the other hand, it is also the case, and the churches will say, if you ask them, there isn't actually much evidence that these schools are socially divisive. They contain a very varied, both ethnic, cultural and class mix, and they do certainly as well as they can to achieve their main aim, which is to spread the word of God to as many children as possible. In fact, secular state schools are often highly selective on the basis of nothing other than money. In fact, our state school system in this country is incredibly socially selective, and it's basically divided up on how big a house price you can afford and what catchment area you can get into. This is how it's done. So by comparison with that, the necessary discrimination which church schools have to make so that they can ensure that they keep their religious character is minor.
But doesn't it lead precisely to the kind of Potemkin religion that you've identified? The parent who pretends to a religious belief, especially an Anglican belief, who may attend 2 or 3 services a year. I mean, that's...
Well, they can't get away with that. They have to attend a lot more services than that a year to actually get their children into some of these schools because competition to get into them is so strong. And regular attendance and indeed quite a lot of work in the church itself is required. God moves in mysterious ways. One does hear stories of cynical parents who go off to attend church to get their children to school and then find, with the regular attendance at worship and the singing of hymns and the saying of prayers, that they are actually religiously moved as a result. The stories of this have been written by people in newspapers of cynical, hard-faced atheists who found themselves weeping in church at the message of Christ. Well, I can't say I see anything wrong with this. If people are at least compelled to discover what it is that they thought they rejected all their lives, then it can't do any harm. I don't mind. It's a very interesting aspect of our extremely peculiar society, but one which I find quite funny.
What about the proposal by the Commission?
I'd much rather that we had a state education system which was universally good and based upon selection on merit, which would actually remove this particular element from it, so that church schools and secular schools were equally good and people sent their children to church purely because they believed in it. But as it is, I think there's something quite amusing in the fact that people who would otherwise never encounter religion or religious worship are compelled to do so by their desire to get their children properly schooled.
What about the other proposal that the House of Lords benches, which are currently reserved purely for the Church of England bishops, ought to be shared with the imams and the rabbis and the Catholic bishops and the Methodists? I know some get there purely as crossbenchers, but I think this is a more formal proposal.
I think that the Church of England bishops should keep their seats in the House of Lords. And I'm very happy for representatives of the other faiths in the country to be appointed to the Lords on a, if you like, a formal basis. You could stipulate some numbers to make sure that they're represented as well. The more the voice of God is represented in the councils of the nation, the happier I shall be, whichever religion happens to be it. But I don't see why that should be used as a reason to take something away from the established Church of England. Not, I have to say, that they have a very loud voice, or that it's often raised very strongly in the cause of God.
And just finally, Peter, and this point takes us back to the first conversation we had several years ago about the monarchy in Christian Britain. The Commission recommends that the coronation service for the next monarch should be overhauled to include other faiths. But I think you and I have talked in the past about Prince Charles and his desire to be a defender of faith. What's the problem with a coronation service that may tip its hat to the other faiths of Britain?
When you say what's the problem with it, it's not so much what's the problem with it as what will it signify, what difference will it make. Now, I've been writing for years about my certainty that when the coronation is held, and may it be a long way away, of the next monarch of this country, it will be very different from the one in 1953, because I don't believe it would be possible for them to hold the service as strongly and explicitly Protestant. The question is how far you go. The question is whether you use this as an opportunity to secularize it, whether you use this as an opportunity to make it more religious, to satisfy the quite large number of new citizens of this country who probably believe more strongly in God than quite a lot of Christians do, or what you do.
And probably believe more strongly in the monarchy too.
Maybe so, I don't know. But here's the problem. The laws and culture and traditions of this country are very heavily based upon the Protestant settlement under Queen Elizabeth I. And almost everything that we do done since has been based upon that. The Houses of Parliament themselves are a religious building. The chimes of Big Ben are based upon the air in Handel's Messiah, I know that my Redeemer liveth. The whole thing is full of religion, from cellar to chimney, and it's inescapable. Now, if you change that, then you change our society. If that's what you want to do, then explain what it is that you want to do and let people know. The trouble with most of this is that it's been done by stealth and by default.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.